Welcome everybody to the March HANC general meeting. I'm glad to see so many folks here. And so today we're going to be talking about redistricting. Why does redistricting matter? Why is it important? Why should you care about it? And what's going on? We did have another we had SF Rising come to this meeting before a couple months ago to talk about redistricting, so that'll also help build on that. But before we jump into it, I just want to open up space for any announcements that anybody has. So feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have any announcements. All right. Okay. Seeing no announcements, the end of the meeting, if anything comes to mind, you can also shout it out then. All right. So we're going to pass it over to Calvin Welch with the HANC board to enlighten us more about redistricting. What's going on?
Thank you, David. I wonder if you could put the original maps up, the 2000 map, the three maps that were the previous iterations of district elections of the boundaries. San Francisco elected supervisors by district through most of the 19th century. And in the early 20th century, the district supervisors, at the height, I think there were 26 or 27 supervisors. There is a great photograph outside of the Board of Supervisors meeting room that has the Board of Supervisors at the inauguration of the supervisors' chambers. And I think there are 21 supervisors sitting at desks. And of course, the population at that time was greatly less than it is today. And so there was probably a supervisor for every 5 or 6 San Franciscans. The Reform Charter of 1932 did in district supervisors and went to an at-large system in which supervisors were elected citywide. The way in which it was done was every 2 years, there would be a supervisorial election for a 4-year term. Supervisors were elected by the top vote getters citywide being elected. There were no runoffs. There was no requirement for majority vote. It simply was the top citywide vote getters. And that system continued on until 1976. In 1976, in a city that at that time was almost 80% tenants, there wasn't a single tenant on the Board of Supervisors. No person of color had ever been directly elected to the Board of Supervisors by 1976 without first having been appointed to the board by the mayor. That was the only way. San Francisco had, by 1976, I believe, one African-American supervisor that was elected, and Terry Francois, and one, by 1976, one Asian, a Chinese supervisor. From 1932 until 1976, the Board of Supervisors was, with those two exceptions, lily white. Both Terry Francois and the Chinese supervisor had been appointed first by the mayor before they ran citywide. So it wasn't until the district election of 1977 that San Francisco elected for the first time an African American, an Asian, and a Latino to the Board of Supervisors. And of course, it elected the first gay elected official, or at least publicly announced gay supervisor. I think there's reason to believe that there were other supervisors who were gay, but stayed deeply in the closet. Harvey Milk was elected in 1977 after having tried twice to be elected citywide and was defeated. And he was elected from our district, from D5, which looked much different than the district does now. In 1979, district elections was on the ballot 4 times before it won, starting in 1972. It elicited almost unanimous opposition from the media, from business interests, and even initially from organized labor. The only people that were for it were people, and there were never quite enough until 1976 to gain election. In 1975, George Moscone was elected mayor, and George Moscone was a strong supporter of district supervisors. He had been a supervisor, elected at large, and he spoke very eloquently about how an at-large supervisor basically had no constituency. George was a strong supporter of district elections, and I dare say that without his strong support, district elections might have never been established. The irony was that the first district elected Board of Supervisors was dominated by previously elected citywide supervisors. So in kind of a unique way, the first 11 district elected supervisors were, with the exception of 4 of the 11, were all incumbent at-large elected supervisors. And it took them a while to get used to representing a district. But the interesting thing was that by 1979, all of those incumbent supervisors but one, all of the at-large elected supervisors but one, were defeated, and in the by district, truly district supervisors. With the assassination of Milk and Moscone by a districted elected supervisor, this was the headline of the Chronicle, Dan White, who in fact opposed district election of supervisors, and was in no way a supporter of district election of supervisors, was nonetheless made the poster child. Literally, I mean, the Chronicle literally argued that district election of supervisors elected murderous assassins, and that unless and until we returned to sanity, which was at-large elections, we would continue to be the victim of quite possibly criminally insane candidates for district supervisor. The historic argument has always been that district supervisors were too narrow in their focus, that they lost sight of the big citywide issues like expanding convention centers and expanding the airport and expanding the port. Those were the citywide issues, which of course happened to be business issues. But things like rent control, things like policing, things like decent parks and public open spaces were not citywide issues. Those were parochial neighborhood issues. The difference, of course, was that the people endorsed district election of supervisors, and it was only after the assassination of Melk and Moscone that district election of supervisors was repealed in 1980. And from 1980 to 1996, it was an at-large elected board again, but the irony was the reverse of the first district elected board. Every incumbent supervisor, that is to say a district supervisor, won elections citywide. So we had a at-large elected board that at least half of the supervisors still kept their district offices and behaved as district supervisors. That is to say, they developed real ability to do constituency service, etc. In 1996, Tom Amiano placed on the ballot after a series of task forces and reports that were actually started by Terrence Hallinan, who was a strong supporter of district election of supervisors, then became elected citywide to the Board of Supervisors, and started a movement to reinstitute district elections that Tom Amiano, when he was elected, finished in a ballot measure in 1996. And David, if you could put up the 1996 map. Like the 1976 map, the 1996 map was part of the charter amendment that created supervisors. This is a critically important point. As you well know, state legislatures draw congressional districts, assembly districts, and state legislative districts. That is to say, the typical way it works in the United States is that the legislative body is charged with drawing its own districts. And of course, what that results in is whatever party is in control of the state legislature seeks historically to continue that control by drawing districts that favor their party. We didn't in 1976, and again, it picked up in the Amiano Charter Amendment, we didn't want to do that. We did not want the legislative body, the Board of Supervisors, to actually draw the district boundaries. So in 1976, we went through a series of neighborhood hearings put together by the campaign that did district elections, and I chaired that process that came up with an 11 district map, and we wrote it into the charter. In 1996, Tom Amiano did the same thing. Different district boundaries, but the same form. That is to say, the districts are in the charter. They are not allowed to be, they were not allowed to be drafted by the legislature. Federal law required, and then subsequently to 1976, the Voting Rights Act required that political districts be, the boundaries need to be adjusted on the basis of the decennial census. And the way in which the language of the Charter Amendment in 1976 and 1996 said it was that they will be adjusted while respecting the communities of interest and neighborhoods in the existing districts. That is to say, no one was empowered to totally redraft the districts, but simply adjust them based upon shifts in population. And the first adjustment occurred in 2002. David, could we see that? So this is the original map on the left, and this is the map changed in 2002. As one can see, it's remarkably similar. And that map was the district boundary until until the 2010 census. And this then was the 2010, actually 2012 is when it was done, boundaries. And as we can see, they are basically the same. Part of that reason, of course, is that San Francisco's population did not increase greatly. And so and if it did, it was kind of naturally throughout the city, and the increase in population was basically even. And so given the restrictions in the charter, the one big difference between the 1990 original 1996 map and the 2002 map was the addition of Treasure Island into District 6. As well as the secret is kept, the Farallones are in District 1. And if you see the legal map of District 1, it goes way off into the Pacific Ocean and includes the Farallones. So in 2020, we have experienced a population growth of substantial growth, over 80,000 new residents between the 2010 and the 2020. But more importantly, and I think critically important, in fact, is that that growth was not evenly distributed throughout the city. As anybody who's followed housing and development issues know, Mission Bay, an entirely new neighborhood, was created in D6 and the borders of D10. Most of the live work, I don't know if people remember the great battle over live work lofts in the early 20s. Most of the live work lofts were built in District 6. And the overwhelming majority of affordable housing that was built in the city was built in District 6. So we ended up with two districts. Thank you, David. You can see on the right district population, D6, the least population is in D4 with 72,784 folk. And the most is in D6 with 103,000. So the next largest district is D10. So the growth occurred asymmetrically, if you will, in D6 and D10. and the eastern side of the city. Yet both of those districts are districts that have discernible neighborhoods, significant populations of color, people of color, the African American population, the Latino population, the Filipino population are significant populations in D6 and D10. And so it's not just simply, well, so the question is, how do we adjust to keep the districts as nearly equal in population as we can, while respecting communities of interest and existing neighborhoods? What that means, of course, is that Western San Francisco, as one can see, D1, D4, D7, all have, all need, if you will, population. To move a political boundary from Bayview Hunters Point to the Sunset is a political impossibility. It is not possible to simply draw a district that takes 20,000 people from D5, from D6, and puts 20,000 people in D4 without totally and completely transforming the districts in between, 9, 8, 7, for example, and running, if you will, roughshod over neighborhoods and communities of interest. What are communities of interest? Our fellow board member Tess Wellborn will spend a good deal of time, perhaps this evening, talking about the communities of interest in D5. Tess is heading up a process, a district drafting, boundary drafting process in D5 that has convened virtually all of the major neighborhood organizations in the district and has discussed what they think they have in common. And it is those communities of interest that have to be balanced with population figures. And in order to meet the requirements of the Voting Rights Act and of the charter of the city and county of San Francisco. So what that means is that every district, virtually every district in the city, will change its boundaries. How much it changes its boundaries is dependent upon how much relative weight is given population equality versus keeping together common neighborhoods and communities of interest. It wouldn't make a lot of sense, for example, it would be extraordinarily controversial to, for example, take the Duboce Triangle and move it into District 5 in order to create room in District 8 to pour some of the overpopulation of D6, which District 8 borders, into D8. Nor would it make a lot of sense to take a big chunk of, for example, Visitation Valley and move it into D11 and then move a big chunk of D11 into D7. Let's say the OMI into D7. So if you're just balancing populations, numbers, you end up with one map. I wonder, David, if we could go to the task force's map. And what I'm going to be showing you is a map released last night. In 2002, the Board of Supervisors placed a charter amendment on the ballot that created a redistricting task force. Both the 96 and 76 charter amendments that created district elections left to the Board of Supervisors itself the adjustments for population. In 2002, the newly elected district board, that was the first board that had been elected by districts since 1979, was very concerned, I would say politically terrified of Willie Brown. And their concern was that the mayor would figure out some way, Willie Brown would figure out some way to redraft the boundaries that would disadvantage them and advantage him. How he could do that, I have no idea. But nonetheless, that was the fear. And so they drafted in 2002 a charter amendment which created a task force of which the mayor selected 3 members, the Board of Supervisors elected 3 members, and originally the Department of Elections, the Registrar of Voters, selected 3, unless there was an elections commission formed, which there was in 2003, in which case, in 2001, in which case the election commission would appoint 3 members. And so this disinterested body was created in 2002 and charged with doing the revisions based upon the decennial census, and specifically was instructed to protect communities of interest and balance population. So there's 2 competing, if you will, tasks: to meet the new population numbers as nearly as possible in each district, while maintaining communities of interest in those districts. And given the asymmetrical population growth that San Francisco experienced from 2010 to 2020, that is almost they are almost competing requirements. They are not necessarily consistent because of the tremendous growth in only part of San Francisco. So last night, at the instructions of the election task force, the staff of the election task force drew this map, and they were instructed by the task force to do it in a way that made no district more than 1% different in population than all the others. So this is a nearly equal in population draft. And it has created a firestorm of reaction, not the least from District 8. If you look at District 8, is there any way, David, that we can put this side by side with the current boundary?
Let me see. I'll try.
Olive DeVoe's triangle, for example, is moved out of District 8 and into District 5. Almost all of the OMI is moved out of District 11 and moved into District 7, I believe. there are significant, the inner sunset is cut in half or maybe 3 times. Some of it moved into District 7. Most of it moved into District 5. Excuse me, into District 4. District 4 itself is extended south to include some very conservative districts around Stonestown and to the west. District 1 is moved up to the Presidio, from 28th to Park Presidio, all of that area north of Lake Street, which is a very high socioeconomic status part of the world, much higher than the rest of the Richmond, is moved from District 2 to District 1. In District 5, the big difference is that Japantown is basically removed from District 5 and separated from the Western Addition, which has long been its historic since the days of urban renewal. Japantown, for those of you who don't know, was Area 1 of the Western Addition project area, and what we now call the Western Addition was Area 2. They joined together in opposing urban renewal and have been solid allies since. And my understanding, I met with the chair of the task force this afternoon, and his phone has been melting. His name is Arnold Townsend. He was a Western Addition activist back in the day. He's very close to Japantown, and all of his friends in Japantown are blaming him. He is quick to point out this is a theoretical map, and it was done by the consultants, not him. So this is a very, I could go on and talk about other parts of the city in which key historic neighborhoods are either divided or removed from their electoral political context, at least in the back. So this is what happens when you simply put your thumb on one side of the equation, which is make the districts as nearly equal as possible. You basically, you cannot, as the consultant repeatedly said, we can't keep neighborhoods and communities of interest together if we do a 1% difference. Both the charter and the ballot measures accept up to a 5% variation in population. And it is possible, if you allow a certain variation in that is based upon the demographic reality of the growth of San Francisco, that one critic of one version of the map, which we'll look at tonight, the community unity map, a critic of the community unity map said, well, you know, this map is obviously in error because it has a bias towards Eastern San Francisco. Well, of course it has a bias towards Eastern. That's where the population growth occurred. The population growth did not occur equally. So it's very hard to keep neighborhoods together and move populations from one side of San Francisco to the other. There is no way to make, for example, D1 equal to D6 in population without fundamentally transforming every district boundary in between, in D3, D5, D2. If we could have the community unity map, David. The Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council last month voted to, the board of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council last month voted to participate and endorse a citywide process in developing a response to the redistricting requirement. And that citywide process was sponsored by a citywide organization, coalition called San Francisco Rising. And San Francisco Rising had the staff time and brain power to actually crunch numbers and talk to over 70 organizations, including 2 months ago, the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council and others, went through a process that came up with this map, which, if you remember the previous map, the existing map is extraordinarily similar to the existing map. But you will notice great variations in the population. D6 is 4.7% above the median, and D2 is minus 0.2%. So there's great variation between the districts, but in population, but still within the band that we believe is legally allowable. But more importantly, preserves neighborhoods and communities of interest, so that in each district, pretty much the major population groups, the major neighborhood organizations, the basic communities that constitute those districts. No district has only one neighborhood. You might be able to say that's almost true in D4, that's almost true in D1, but it's never even been true in the Richmond and the Sunset. The Richmond and the Sunset simply don't have enough population by themselves to form a single district. So every other district, as D1 and D4, every other district is made up of a group of neighbors, of neighborhoods, and a grouping of communities of interest. And having now been in existence for over 25 years as supervisorial districts, those relationships between the neighborhoods and the communities of interest within those districts have grown and ripened. And it would be politically disruptive to break those districts up in a significant way, which is neither contemplated nor required by the city charter. And perhaps we can illustrate that point the best if I hand this over to Tess, and Tess can talk with you about her great work in bringing together the various communities of D5 and getting a consensus and what it takes to get a consensus on most of the district. Even in D5, we don't have total consensus. I'm sorry, before I do that, if you take a look at this, the demographic changes by supervisorial district in the community map version 1, you will see that the task that the Community Unity Coalition set for itself, which was to adjust population figures in a way that preserved communities of interest, in each of the existing districts, which, as I say, have been together now for over 20 years, you can see how well that goal was achieved. On the left, current, is the population. We're just taking a look at population, just raw population. On the left is the current district population as percentages of the whole, not in absolute numbers, of course. And on the left, the community unity map version 1 shows how close we have struggled to maintain, while adjusting for population, the same communities of interest, the same neighborhoods as represented by the races in each district. And we've done a reasonably, I'm biased, I think the San Francisco Rising Coalition has done an excellent job in meeting that dual requirement of adjusting for population differences while maintaining communities of interest. Now, Tess, are you prepared to
I am.
relieve our listeners from having to listen to me anymore?
Well, not anymore. I refuse to do that. You were still going to be on mic one way or another. Okay. Let's see. So I have the ability to share screen. Let me first of all say that I was asked by our supervisor, Dean Preston, to put together a group to look at redistricting and the different interests in D5. And so I started asking neighborhood activists that I knew about in the district to get together. And we had held 3 meetings. The timetable that the task force is on is incredibly accelerated, especially at this point with I'm saying parenthetically, as right now there's like 3 to 4 weeks before they have to have a final map.
April 15th, I believe they have to have the map.
But they have to publish it like on the 9th. So it's like tomorrow. And they've been working on this for months, but what they've been working on, I think, was procedures. Anyway, the task force people all volunteered for it, except for the chair, I understand. So they must have had some idea about what they were getting into and what they wanted to achieve. Okay, so I contacted Lori Lieberman in the Inner Sunset. I contacted Pia Harris in the Fillmore. Let's see. Jason Henderson in the Hayes Valley, and the people in Japantown, the greater Japantown cultural district and the commercial district. And of course, David and Calvin potentially too. So, and we started looking at our neighborhoods and what kinds of things bring us together and what kinds of things may be issues. So we came to some agreement about a number of things. The first one was that the Fillmore, Japantown, and the Haight-Ashbury were core to District 5. Then we added later Hayes Valley Neighborhood Council to that kind of central core. Oh, and Inner Sunset. So, and that's kind of the greater square or rectangle of District 5. It is very interesting when you talk with people from different organizations and they have really different perspectives. HANC is relatively unusual in its more citywide perspective. We do address local issues too. But we are also mindful of what's going on in the bigger picture. For example, if you have 6 of 11 supervisors on the Board of Supervisors who vote progressively, your definition, then things can be passed. And a lot of times what happens on the board is they count, what's the support on this before I even think about working on it or advancing an issue. And to pass, for the Board of Supervisors to pass legislation that the mayor vetoes, they have to have 8. So that's part of, I think, why we have a citywide awareness, is that we know that we do not stand alone unless we're talking about issues like safety, our police department, and maybe the street cleaning services. So before I go further, I wanted to just flash this neighborhood map that the Planning Commission and the task force are going to be using as one of the bases. So this is it. And it looks very familiar, doesn't it? Those same shapes. And there's the Haight-Ashbury, the Inner Sunset, and the Western Addition with Japantown at the top, and the Fillmore, which used to be almost all of this at one time there. And down here at the corner of Meeting Market is where the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Council is. Now, one thing I've noticed is that, again, as I said, we tend to have an eye on the city as well as an eye on our neighborhood. But many other neighborhood associations, in my experience, have been primarily homeowner oriented, and let's beautify the neighborhood and let's keep things safe and clean. And those are good things, but they're not all there is to living in the city. So I'll stop that screen share. So one of the things we started talking about was the Inner Sunset, because there are several different districts that are touching the Inner Sunset. And I guess we could flash that map again to point out that Inner Sunset. And early in the process, one of our friends called me from D Forward and said, would you be willing to give up part of the Inner Sunset to help us out in this redistricting process? And we talked about it, thought about it, and we thought, well, instead, we had already given up in the previous redistricting. We had gone from the Inner Sunset to 19th Avenue, and we moved it back to 17th Avenue. And this time we thought, well, maybe we could move it back to Funston and still keep the core of the Inner Sunset, which Calvin has sometimes referred to as the outer Haight-Ashbury. The Inner Sunset, it has a high percentage of renters like we do in the center core of D5, and a mixture of backgrounds, interests. It's feels a lot like around the Haight and around the rest of D5. So that is the issue of the Inner Sunset became an issue because of other districts touching ours. And some people were under the impression, I guess, that if we came to the task force and said, we're willing to give these blocks of the Inner Sunset to X district, that they would listen to us. Well, they are having their own process. And I guess it's also, gosh, I've got a card game metaphor instead of a sports metaphor. So we're holding on to some of our cards until things get a little further along in general. Another issue was at the other end of D5, down there at Market and Van Ness, where the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Council is. And they wanted to acquire some parts of on the other side of Van Ness and south of Market. And I guess I should put them some map up again. David, maybe you could put up the Unity map.
Yeah, I can put it up.
Yeah, and maybe I can cursor on that. So, yeah. So they were interested in going across Market, and they were talking about that we should actually take over the Civic Center, you know, go extend over to Polk, and then we could have the Civic Center, and we could have some of the music district. And then they said, well, why don't we go over to Larkin or even Hyde, and we could have a big cultural district. And I said, well, you know, the redistricting is supposed to be about the people, not the institutions. But this is something that some of the people in Hayes Valley, and I think they're very influential, want to do. We, in this Unity map, when we met with the Unity folks, the SF Rising and the big coalition there, the Tenderloin, as part of D6, was being forced to consider changing its boundaries, reducing its boundaries. Here, pink is the proposed new boundaries, and green is the old boundaries, I believe. And
Yes.
so the Tenderloin, I mean, all of D6 had to make painful cuts, but the Tenderloin said, well, why don't we let D5 have this area between Van Ness and Polk and south of approximately Ellis. And it will be the least painful cut we could make here around this. And that many of those people anyway tend to go to the west when they're looking to go out to restaurants and such, rather than turning into going to Little Saigon for restaurants and so forth. So those of us who were representing HANC at that point, you know, we're saying, well, we can live with that. It's not that we want to have the Civic Center particularly, or an arts district, but this we could live with and be, you know, make it a compromise that would serve both of our interests and in this case, interests of Hayes Valley, as well as the greater D5 and the Tenderloin D6. The third issue was up here in the north above Ellis Street, where Cathedral Hill is. And you know, all those towers of senior housing that's up there. Well, there's actually some lower income senior housing, and then there's some expensive senior housing. And they had been divided by the D5 line, as well as maybe Van Ness. I'm not sure about that part. But they wanted to move into D2 to be whole. And they knew also that D2 was going to need some numbers. You know, we're with this bulge that we're pushing over from the east through the middle and over to the west. So again, in the spirit of compromise, we said, we think that's something that we can live with and work with. The other issue that came up was that there's a district that has been referred to as the hub. And so it has been called different things now, but hub is a nice, easy, short way. And actually it's got to be, this is the area that's south of Market around Van Ness and between Market and the freeway. It's not a lovely area. It's kind of, you know, noisy and full of traffic. And there are those who thought if we could get in Hayes Valley, if we could get this whole area here and maybe even a bit more, we could put it under one supervisor and give it a lot of attention And in that process, we would acquire not just the one condo tower, excuse me, the condo tower we have at One Oak, which by the way is being redesigned. It'll still be about 300 feet, but instead of some 300 units, it's going to be some 400 rental units, smaller units. But there's a tower. Any of you been down there by Van Ness and Market lately where there's a heap of rubble where the Walgreens was? There is going to be a tower at 30 Van Ness. Another 300 foot or so tower, another 300 plus units. And south of Market here at South Van Ness, 10 South Van Ness, is another tower. And I expect that sooner or later, the B of A building where the MTA is over on the east side of South Van Ness, there will be another tower. Now, planning decided that because this was a monumental intersection, Market and Van Ness, and it's also, they were calling it the gateway to the west, and that there should be 4 towers here of significant design. Well, it's easy to put things on paper and words. Anyway, the greater hub, can you see both my cursor and David's?
I think they can only see mine.
They don't see yours? I see yours.
I mean, they can only see mine. I
Oh,
can't
they
see
only
yours.
see yours. Okay. Well, if you sort of wiggle along Market Street going east from Van Ness, on the east side of Market, going towards the bay. There's another section of the hub that wiggles along in that area. And so it's been added to the Market Octavia plan, which again was about construction and traffic, and also part of related to the demolition of the Central Freeway after the earthquake and all of that discussion. So this was an issue that we were not able to resolve, and in this group, and we agreed to disagree. So Hayes Valley has put in communities of interest documents saying that they really want to have the hub portion. And just a moment, please, Miss iPhone user. And so they have put in requests showing communities of interest. There aren't very many people living here now, but 300 or 400 condo units that will be high income and no affordable housing in any of those 4 towers. And there's another tower that will be on Franklin, the French American School, with housing above it. So when you look at that, that's like 2,500 or so condo units, and that could be around 3,500, 4,000 residents living in high income housing. And if we had all of that, we have some of it coming to our district, because already we've taken the 2 corners around Market and Market and North Van Ness, the north side of Van Ness. We have those 2 towers, but we don't have currently in D5 the other 2 tower, one tower that's already been approved and one that will be somewhere in the future. Now, it would be fair to say, though, that one of those towers, I forget which one of it, did pay for the purchase of the Monster in the Mission for affordable housing. So while that one of those 2 towers does not have affordable housing in it, they did do some very significant contribution to affordable housing, just not in this area. And most of the rest of this area here on the way to the freeway is pretty fine-grained, small lots and small buildings. So there's a lot more work to be done in this area in terms of making it friendly for pedestrians. I don't know how they're going to deal with reducing the traffic noise on of the freeway. and carrying through the community benefits there. Okay, so I think we can take that map down now. Thank you.
Testa, do you want to take the question from the iPhone person?
Sure. Thank you. Questioner, iPhone?
The person that does not have their name listed but has their hand raised, it says iPhone. Let's see if I can try to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me unmute. Now I'm
Okay.
unmuted.
Yeah. I have to do it.
Yeah, it just wasn't clear to me, Tess. Those little pink lines seem to contradict each other. It was hard to figure out what's in D5 and what's not. But certainly the issue of that elite corner there could really cause some havoc with our votes.
Yes. So
Yes, if you don't mind, Tess,
go ahead.
it's currently, the hub is currently in D6. It is proposed in the task force map to be in D8.
Oh,
And in the community unity map, it's proposed to be in part in D8 and part in D9. So it's split between D8 and D9. So it's only our friends in Hayes Valley who are arguing that, I mean, there's already been approved about 2,000 market rate condos. There are at least 4 more buildings that are going to be done, and each one of the 4 buildings in the hub that have been approved have all feed out, by which I mean they paid a fee for affordable housing citywide or elsewhere, not in the hub. So what we're looking at in a neighborhood that is not only D5, that is not only 70-75% tenant, but of those 70-75% of tenants, maybe 80% of those tenants are in price controlled units, either former redevelopment areas or rent controlled units. So what's being talked about, and the average household size in San Francisco is 2.2 persons per unit. So we're looking at 2,000, probably at finish, at least 4,000. We're looking at 8,000 market rate residents who are totally in market rate units. It would be a significant shift, and the argument that we've made is that makes much more sense to be in D8. If you go down Market Street from Van Ness west, and you look at all of the new development that Senator Wiener, when he was supervisor in District 8, championed, it's all that kind, it's market rate condominiums with virtually no BMRs or very few BMRs. And that the hub is that same as an extension of that development. And it should go into D8, not D5. For some reason, folks in D9 want part of it. I don't quite understand, but
Well,
okay.
it's because there's an American Indian cultural district that drapes across that area.
I dare say there won't be one American Indian living in it, however.
Well, not in the hub, well, but they're in the district. They might not be in the condo tower, but there are those other dwellings too.
But a district,
who's
a
proposing
cultural
that it be
district
in
is not a
D5?
population.
Sorry.
Who
was
is,
that-
who is proposing it be in D5? Is it on a map now for D5?
Yeah.
Oh, it is a proposal
Karen.
of the Hayes Valley and Van Ness corridor folks.
Right.
But none of
District
the
five-
official maps.
There is no official map now except our current map.
Okay, thank you.
And the current map has the entirety of the hub in D6.
And so in a way, that's a sense, it's in their ballpark to give it away, so to speak. Again, negotiations, that unity map that Calvin showed you with all of those little tiny changes, not the plus and minus.
This is the task force map.
Yeah, this is
And-
just showing the task force plus or minus 1% map.
Yeah, take that one away, go back to the unity map. So I guess that I would say again, the micro changes in the unity map, which we included taking a look at communities of interest, which is my next subject, and the cultural districts, and making these tiny changes. And there you see the green lines represent the current boundaries of districts, and the pink lines represent the proposed lines. So as Calvin was saying earlier, that keeping fidelity to the neighborhoods that have already been long working with each other, whether we're talking about a greater neighborhood or a smaller neighborhood. For example, in D3, they got gobs of neighborhoods. I would like to show one more map that, let's see. So let's see, what am I? No, not a map. Okay. So we talked about, so cancel that. How do we de-share there? Well, okay. So there is one other issue that we didn't discuss much in that group, and that was Coal Valley. The Coal Valley Improvement Association has talked about that they would want to be in D8. I haven't had a current conversation with Carol Glossinger about that, but that is, now if we lost the inner
I see
sunset,
Karen Cromie's on the phone. I don't know if she's familiar with the latest.
if we lost part of an additional part or all of the inner sunset, if we lost Coal Valley, if we gained the hub, and we lost some other parts, say, of the North District, our District 5 would seriously lose the character that it has now. So I'll stop there. And I wanted to talk about these communities of interest, because that's something where you might have an interest in helping us out, as well as in looking at testifying, commenting on the task force. The community of interest, people in a geographic area that share a common bond and interest. And in District 5, our voting patterns, that we tend to vote in certain, with a majority to a lot, very large majority on many issues. We tend to, we have this link with again, the Fillmore and the Inner Sunset, that we do things together. That we're the Japantown and the Fillmore have the shared historical trauma of the Japanese Americans being put in concentration camps in World War II, and the loss of all of their property and their businesses, and the African Americans who came in to do the war work, then got urban removal, or Negro removal, I think Du Bois called it, was it? So Western Addition had all of those Victorians that were torn down. The city decided that it knew best and that those areas were run down. Well, you could say, why didn't you just fix them? But no, they knew better. So those are part of the communities of interest, and Japantown did a short, this could be a few paragraphs to define a community of interest about that shared trauma, and about the Japanese American community has said many times that we don't want anybody to go through what we went through. And they have stood up against even the mistreatment of Muslims. So communities of interest if you can write up a community of interest about your part of D5, or about what makes D5 important to you. And you would describe who's involved, what's the heart of it, what's the geography, maybe there's a shared culture, or you all are connected by having kids who go to the same schools and play the same after school sports and so on. Otherwise, another one is because of our shared history and language, or working together on community projects, cultural projects, and that creates a sense of unity and understanding. A number of these kinds of communities of interest descriptions have been submitted to the task force. And when they have specific geography, like, this street, this street, this street, this street are the boundaries, they will be included in the task force's weighing of how to draw the map lines. I think I've covered most of, excuse me, what I was asked to cover. So I'll stop share screen, but you all could choose to write a community of interest about, for example, the seniors. What do the seniors do in San Francisco, in our district? How important libraries are to a lot of our community entities. And I would invite you to do that. It's really something that can be very quick, a few paragraphs. Okay, I see a question from Kristen.
No, I just was mentioning that I thought there was some representation from Coal Valley on the call, and I wondered if there was maybe an update from them about if their thinking had changed. I don't know that they told us directly in this forum what they were thinking. I don't know, Karen, if you're online and you want to talk.
Karen, do you want to say something? Somebody else can ask her to unmute, but I think basically that we should let that lie for now. We've got our own kettle of fish to fry here. Well, that's
Yeah,
it's very,
I would
it's
say
very funny.
we could open it up to any other questions also, if folks just have questions about anything Calvin presented or what Tess went over.
And let me say, I really would like to see 30 people from HANC and our friends and our neighbors calling in next Wednesday evening between approximately 5:30 and about 7 or maybe 7:30, 7 or 7:30, in that time period, to talk for 2 to 3 minutes about what is special about District 5 and the communities that are within it that are important to you. And if you can, say a good word for the community unity map, and that you think that citywide perspective is useful. So let me turn it back to Calvin, and I'll stand by, and if there are more comments and questions, because this is going to change how San Francisco works for the next 10 years. So I hope that you'll be able to squeeze a little time out for this among all the other issues. I see Karen's hand up.
Just
Yeah,
going to say that.
Sorry, I'm going to just jump in really quick too, just to show folks the task force website, and just reiterate again the meeting next Wednesday. So I'll just show it. I'll put it in the chat too, but you go to the city's redistricting task force website, right? And then you can scroll down and they have upcoming meetings, and then past meetings. So next week on Wednesday, March 16th at 5:30 p.m. is the District 4 and District 5 specific meeting. And so this will be the second time and the last time that the task force will have a meeting that focuses specifically on District 5. They combined it with District 4 this time. So like Tess was saying, we really need to turn out folks to support the unity map, community unity map that we talked about here in the process, and also point out, the communities of interest in the Haight or, where you live. And so you can just click on it. Right. They don't put the agenda up until I think maybe a few days before, but the public comment time has usually been pretty close to after the meeting starts. And so like you can see this one coming up for the District 1 and District 2. So when you click, you'll see the agenda is here. And then the part you want to talk about is this second item number, Districts 1 and the districts, it'll be 4 and 5 on Wednesday, boundaries, neighborhoods, and communities of interest. And so they have public comment, and public comment is 2 minutes long. And so I'll put those links in the chat, but you can go actually in person, or you can call and give public comment over the phone. So in person, you will just have to look here where it says on the right which room they're going to do. I think they've been changing the room. So just if you want to go in person, you could do it that way and give public comment. And you could also call in here to give public comment. So that's the call-in info. And I think it's on the agenda also, the call-in info.
Yes, and there's, you can also watch on SF.gov, I believe, and on WebEx, or go in person. But letters are welcome, but we really need people on the phone too that day. And if you're on the phone, you can have it, on relatively quiet, and they will say, your line is unmuted. And that will be the signal for you to tune in if you were doing something else, cooking or whatever. So other comments or questions?
Karen, you want to go ahead, Karen?
Yeah, well, now two. One is, can you send out that information that you just had on the screen? Can that go out in an email to the HANC list?
Yes, I believe that one time it already has gone out by email, and I've asked to have it go out again on Sunday or Monday.
I'll look for it.
Yeah.
Okay, the other question is, I went via phone to one of these meetings, and I think it was Community Unity Group, and was concerned because I had gotten pushed out of 5 and into 1, I think. And with the unity map that I'm seeing now, I'm very comfortably in 5, and I'm very grateful for that. But it sounds like that doesn't mean I can breathe a sigh of relief yet, that I may need to convince this official group.
Yes.
Is that the case?
Yes, do not breathe a sigh of relief. If I might make a point here, we're down to there's 2 approaches that people take. One is mistaken and the other is correct. The mistaken tact at this point is to argue over a single district's boundary. Nobody on the task force anymore, after they have done an 11 district map, is interested in a single district's boundary, because they understand what the folks in the Community Unity Coalition understand. Their task is by the middle of April to come up with an 11 district plan. So they're going to be looking at 11 district plans. And the thing about the Community Unity map is that it is the most inclusive process, I would argue, more inclusive than the task force to date. The task force hasn't generated a lot of interaction yet. It will. Publishing last night an 11 district map. My understanding from the chair this afternoon is his phone has melted. The response has been horrific and negative. They're kind of reeling, and they're going to be looking at a version 2 real quick of an 11 district map. So our good friends in the eastern part of our district who don't want to make up their mind about an 11 district map, but want to argue about the southeast corner of D5, free country, Second Amendment works, free speech, go right ahead. But it's answering a question no one is asking. So the key from here to April is making an 11 district plan work the best for all of us. And right now, the simple fact is the community unity map works the best for the overwhelming majority of districts. And it isn't perfect. There are some parts of D5 that I don't much care for in the community unity map. I hate to lose the Outer Haight, any of the precincts of the Outer Haight, the Inner Sunset, but I will accept it. I understand Kristen was very clear. Kristen, who studies, I guess, this vote very closely, or is in contact with people who do, tells us, rightfully so. I looked it up. She's absolutely right. The precincts that we're picking up in Polk Gulch are not good precincts. I want to remind people, Dean Preston won by 200 votes. We've given up, probably in the Inner Sunset alone, 1,000 votes. And we picked up maybe 600 bad votes.
Aye.
It's that close everywhere. So it really becomes important to look at the 11 district plan. And if you look at the demographics of the Community Unity 1, if you're happy with the current mix of supervisors on the Board of Supervisors, the greatest chance of returning that group is in districts that are described in the Community Unity map. If you're not in favor of the current Board of Supervisors, then come up with something else. But it is at this point too late to argue over the southeast corner of District 9 or the northeast portion of District 10. It's, unless you can put it in a context that adjusts an 11 district system. So it's critically important from this point on that when you give testimony to the task force, and I urge you to do so, you must endorse an 11 district plan. And the only one out there that makes sense for us, those of us who are pleased with the current mix on the Board of Supervisors, I don't mean personality. there's a couple of those people that I really don't much care for, but I like their vote. They vote good, and we count votes, not personality. So if you're happy with the direction of the Board of Supervisors, not in the direction of the nation or the direction of the world or the direction of the mayor or the direction of the state, but if you're happy with the direction of the Board of Supervisors, then the community unity map has to inform any contact you have with the task force to be meaningful from this time out.
I see that Anastasia has a question.
Okay, so my question is, Calvin, has the task force seen the community unity map, or are we just telling them about it in our testimony?
No. It is appointments have been made. We had the first meeting with the chair, Arnold Townsend, today. We shared with him the community unity map, and I've known Arnold Townsend for so many years that I'm embarrassed to say how many years they are. And I know Arnold. How shall I say this? Arnold has a very broad view, and he and I have agreed on many things, and he and I have disagreed on a few really important things. Arnold was impressed by the community unity map. It met what he said were his concerns that the 1% map of the task force consultants didn't address. And Arnold understood that was an exercise. Okay, if you want districts that are equal in population, if you want to be a population fundamentalist and have no variation, no greater than 1% in population, then this is what you're going to get. And Arnold was pretty sure that people wouldn't like it, and is more than a little pissed that he's being blamed for it. But nonetheless, he was impressed not only, and this is really important, not only with the content of the map, but who presented it to him. The committee that presented it to him, that, as he said, gee, you guys look like what you're talking about. You look like you represent a number of communities of interest. And it's really good. Arnold believes in coalitions. And the community unity process is the best and most authentic coalition on this issue that we have. He was impressed. I have to say, I don't believe he was shining us on. I think he was impressed. He didn't say, you got my vote. He did say he thought he could control 5 votes. And that's what we need, is 5 votes.
Okay, so when we testify, do we say, I've seen the community unity map
Yes.
and I agree with it because
Yes.
of population this and the racial
Yes.
makeup? Okay. got
Yes.
it. Thank you.
Yes. And they will have seen a full suite of maps and data on each district, and the 11 district breakdown, even by I can't say, but certainly I was going to say PVI, Progressive Voter Index, but I'm not sure that data is being given to the task force, because but the population demographic information for each district is as well. And the changes that are being proposed are very graphically laid out, easy to follow. And if you look at their packet, and you can go to their website and look at their packet, it makes eminent sense. I mean, anybody who knows the city, understands that whoever did this knows the city and cares about its communities. It's pretty clear. Jeff?
Just a quick question. I'm wondering if you addressed the plus or minus 1% issue and if he thought that there was a possibility they would move past that. And second one is kind of the same for the community unity map. Do you think there's any intent that you would try, that the community unity map would try moving towards a plus or minus 1% to fit that profile?
Yeah. I don't know when you arrived, but it seemed to me I spent an awful lot of time on the 1% and 5% at the beginning of my presentation. But
I've been here for no. I just wondered if the meeting today that you had.
No. Arnold is not at all wedded to the 1% map, and I mean they're all backing away from the 1% map. I mean the 1% map. Scott Wiener accused personally Arnold Townsend of screwing the gay community with this map. And, Arnold said, well, maybe I've fucked with the gay community once or twice over the years, but I have never completely fucked any community. And he was pissed. And I think from what he told me, what he told us, the task force, every member of the task force has been getting a large number of very negative responses to the 1% map. And the consultant said, we're supposed to deal with communities, neighborhoods, and this map doesn't, because we were told to do it as nearly as close as we could to population. And I think what has happened with this map, I mean, this is my guess, is that we're not going to go back to that again. We're not going to go back to a 1%. We're going to take a look at what makes sense in terms of communities of interest, of neighborhoods. Those are all the questions that Arnold was asking. And he was satisfied with the answers that he got looking at the material presented him by the Community Unity Coalition. And, my understanding is that there is a grouping meeting every member of the task force. And, they're going to argue for the Community Unity map. So from here on out, we'll see if the Community Unity map itself, as you well know, there is a committee that meets every Wednesday of the Community Unity Coalition. I believe you've attended those meetings. And we'll see if we have to make adjustments. There is still, the Latino community has not signed off on this map. They haven't signed off on any map. And there's a meeting this week with the leadership of the Community Unity map and the leadership of the Latino community, Latinx community. And we'll see. I mean, there may be changes that result as a result of those meetings. So it's still a dynamic process, but I think it's important here on out for us to pay attention, but to support the Community Unity map. The 1%, 5% is an issue because the language in the 2002 creation of the, if you go back and read the language of the 2002 amendment that created the task force and set its parameters, there is some very generalized and vague language that surrounds up to 5%. But it's my understanding that the city attorney has opined to the task force that it can go up to 5% variation. That it need not only be population, but as the charter says, a balance, as the both Proposition T in 1976 and Proposition G in 1996, as they both said, the lines should be adjusted based upon census population numbers and keeping together communities of interest. It has always been a balance. It has never been only make it equal in population. And the balance is, that's where the mystery is. That's where the magic is. That's where the romance of this is. And this is at this point, a very romantic process, you know,
There
because
was,
it's very mysterious.
Calvin, there was a question from Kat and Richard. Does anyone know how much the consultants were paid to create a map that nobody wants? Or
No, I
like?
think you're gonna have to read Mission Local. That's the kind of story that Mission Local will do.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and in fairness to the consultants, apparently they were told what software to use. And the software doesn't have the ability to do some things that one would like. For example, to generate a PDF.
Yeah, it's very difficult if you use their software on their website to produce a map that you can share with anybody else. It's all one way. It's you to them. On the other hand, the community unity mapping process uses a much more user-friendly set of software.
So we do want comments and suggestions, just as Calvin said. There will be some minor
There'll be
changes.
changes.
There will be changes. There will be a couple more versions probably. But from now on, it's like hyper time.
10 years ago, there were 4 versions. 10 years ago, the community unity map went through, and that's what it was called, went through 4 versions. These were very small changes, you know. But, you know, important changes, you know, you know, should Valencia Street be in District 8 or District 9? That's almost a metaphysical question, but it's a very important question. Should 9th Avenue be included in District 5? Should the inner Sunset certainly include out to 9th Avenue? Some would argue, some at this meeting would argue that 9th and Irving is the very heart of the inner Sunset. Others would say, no, the inner Sunset goes, you know, almost to the beach. Merchants claim, Tess likes to point out, merchants are, you know, claim that the inner Sunset goes to Arguello.
Well,
You know,
I was gonna say, from, you know, our perspective, like the Haight-Ashbury Merchants Association, we would simply use the boundaries that are stated in our bylaws. So I'm sure that inner Sunset merchants are trying to argue the same, right?
Right, that's what's in their bylaws, from Fulton to, I believe, the L Street, or they and many blocks past 19th.
Because, you know, when you're setting a merchant boundary, you're basically looking at like common interests, right? Like bringing marketing people to come and shop in your businesses or whatever. And then, you know, the other component of that is, you know, you've solicited dues from those businesses and so on. And so you're trying to represent them with a board. So, I mean, I understand, I respect that they want to have their merchant corridor intact, but it sounds like geographically it's not going to be possible.
Well, it's a very expansive definition of the inner sunset. And I believe a very expansive notion of even the business district of who shops there, you know. I think very few people on Fulton Street shop at 9th and Irving. Lori.
Hi, so I'm the Inner Sunset person on this call and also been invited to work on this process some with David and Tess and Calvin. I just wanted to comment about the Inner Sunset Merchants Association. I'm not really familiar with merchants associations in general, but I do know that this particular one does absolutely zero for the merchants in the neighborhood. I mean, they make a claim to represent folks, but they're absolutely clueless and they don't do anything to help the merchants, and they've never really done anything for the merchant corridor. So it's really just an organization in name only. I don't think they carry any weight with most of the merchants. That's all. And the commercial district really doesn't run all the way to 19th Avenue, and there's almost no commercial entities between after what, 4th Avenue. I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous definition. So that's it.
So
Okay.
how many of you are going to be able to get on the phone Wednesday night next? Raise your hand one way or another.
Yes, I'll be there.
Excellent, excellent. I see some thumbs up. Yes, yes.
Can I ask a
raise some
question?
hands. Yay, yay.
Can I ask
Nick, you have a question?
it's kind of a radical question. How is it possible that the task force can do what it ever damn well pleases, completely ignoring everything we say?
Yes.
Yeah, and causing us to go to court? And is that legally possible?
That's a very good question. Believe me, the charter amendment in 2001 that created the redistricting task force was, in my opinion, I have to admit, I didn't pay that much attention to it. It was done right after the new district elected board came into, were elected. I mean, it was in the November 2001 election that created the charter amendment that created the task force. I have to admit that it's only been in the last 3 weeks that I actually read the charter amendment, and I'm kind of stunned at its general nature and at the absolute and complete autonomy that it has. It has absolute autonomy. It doesn't have to, you're absolutely right. It doesn't, they could do whatever map they want. Now it's a 9-person body, and that means at least 5 have to agree. I don't think they're, you know, I don't know yet. They haven't taken a disputed vote that I'm aware of. I don't know what the votes are on the task force, but legally, they come up with a plan, and that's it. The only recourse, the Board of Supervisors have no role, the mayor has no role, the city attorney advises them, that's it. And then, being an official task force, the city attorney would defend whatever they came up with, would be legally required to defend in court. So they have a lawyer. So yeah, litigation, if they went rogue and there's nothing that prohibits them from going rogue. Could only be addressed by a lawsuit. You're absolutely right. And that's the real nightmare scenario. The difference is I don't see 5 votes that radical on this task force. But, I don't know. This is 2021. I mean, things are happening that have never happened before, or not in a long time. So I mean, we've got whole state legislatures going rogue, But you're right. Go back and read the 2001 charter memo. I think it was I can't remember, but it's November 2001. You go to the library, you download the voter's handbook for the November 2001 election. They have it at the San Francisco Public Library. You get a PDF, open it up and read it. And as I said, I just did that 2 weeks ago, and I was shocked,
Well, let me finish up. So I've lived here a long, long time. I've never seen San Francisco so fragmented. And maybe it's improper, maybe it's not right to look through the lens of all the recalls, but just on that score, that tells me anything is possible. And there's somebody out of city, all those Republicans and all the money coming from outside the city. Could these people be influenced by those forces that have caused the recalls to be in process? Is that a factor in this in any way? Your widest possible sociological view of your longstanding perspective on politics in San Francisco?
If I could make a suggestion, I listened to last week, there was a meeting of them, and I was very concerned about who these people were and what kind of body. And actually the questions that they were asking were very, very good questions. And they were being very thorough. And I mean, I was thinking, my God, how are they ever going to be able to do this? And I mean, I was impressed. They were asking really good questions. So, I mean, I don't know what you have to say about that, Calvin, but.
No, it's inconceivable to me in San Francisco that there could be an organized effort so clever as to be able to manipulate at least 2 appointing bodies, 2 of 3 appointing bodies. The Board of Supervisors appoints 3, the Department of the Elections Commissions appoint 3, and the mayor appoints 3. It's difficult for me to conjure up what clever set of people, I mean, other than those at this meeting tonight, what clever set of people equipped by, tech money and Republican malice could actually put together a move to secretly influence the appointment of 5, because it takes 5 votes, and that means you have to involve 2 appointing entities, okay? They just can't do the bidding of the mayor. They just can't do the bidding of the Board of Supervisors. They can't do the bidding, if I could even figure out what the bidding of the Elections Commission is. I mean, they couldn't do that. So it's difficult for me to understand how a conspiracy could exist, a single purpose mind could exist that had the influence to appoint 5 members to this commission. Nonetheless, it is sobering to understand that there is no appeal to their decision, except the courts. And being a city-created entity, it will be defended by the city and county of San Francisco, by the city attorney. So my answer is, I think we got to revisit that charter amendment, and we got to do a little bit more thinking about how that works. I don't believe it's not a legislative act, so it's not even open to a referendum. If the board acts stupidly, the people can do a referendum. And I don't know if folks remember back to the monster on the waterfront, which was passed by the Board of Supervisors and was referendized. A petition was circulated, people had to sign it. It took you had to reproduce the entire legislative act, which was a certification of an EIR, which meant that each petitioner had to carry around the EIR. It's incredible. And it was placed on the ballot, and it was defeated. That is to say, the referendum passed, and the measure was defeated. But that's only used for legislative acts. This is not a legislative act. So you couldn't referendum. I think the only thing you could do was sue. And it would be a very interesting lawsuit. The courts are willing. I mean, one of the surprising things for me in this surprising national year has been the number of Republican gerrymandered legislative schemes that have been declared illegal by state courts. I don't know if people saw the story yesterday. There are 4 members of our great Supreme Court who want to review that and actually do believe that state legislatures have the right to overrule voters in certifying their electoral votes. People should remember that's how it worked. That's how it worked for most of this country's life. It was the legislators that cast the electoral votes that elected the president. It wasn't a popular vote. Well, the Republicans are revisiting that 200 years later and are reinventing that. But it's remarkable to me, the willingness of the courts to slap that down. So much so that 4 members of the Supreme Court, and you know what 4 I'm talking about, have recently issued an opinion saying we want a case that we can try that matter on, because we really believe, as the Constitution states, states certify the electoral votes. State legislatures certify. Now, what's happened is in state after state, including California, is the legislature has passed a law. I think in California, it's a constitutional amendment that says that the legislature shall be bound by the popular vote for casting presidential electors. And most states have done that, but some Republican states have repealed that and have taken back to the legislature the right to, no matter what the popular vote is, that the legislature certifies what their electoral vote in the Electoral College will be. I'm greatly, I'm happy that courts have been reversing gerrymandered plans, all by Republican legislatures, because that's how it works. You gerrymander the districts, you get a majority of the Republicans in the legislature, they repeal the law that says the popular vote will determine who the president is. And we have January 6th, not done by a bunch of nincompoops and idiots, but by a more talented group of nincompoops and idiots who are in various state legislatures.
Hey, Calvin, we got to roll up this show. And as much as we could continue, I'm amazed that so many people have stuck with this and very potentially dry subject. And I would like to thank everybody for staying engaged and participating tonight, and thank Calvin too for the excellent history lesson and what we can do about it today.
Yes, and
thank
Calvin, you made it absolutely fascinating, honestly.
Thank you, Calvin.
Yeah, thank you, Calvin and Tess. Also,
Thank you, David.
right? Anybody else want to thank you?
Anybody else want to thank David?
Yeah,
I want to thank
without
David.
David, we would be up the creek.
Everything
We
is
with
with
the
would
whole
not
heart.
be here, folks.
Thank Calvin, everybody.
Well, I'm
He
glad,
runs this meeting.
I'm glad I came, and good night.
Yeah, thanks, Anastasia. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone.
See you Wednesday.
Thanks,
Yes,
everyone.
next
See you
Wednesday,
Wednesday.
5:30 p.m.